Black people, we must stop misdiagnosing our collective condition. Our collective condition is not the Stockholm syndrome. In order to liberate ourselves, we must gain an accurate diagnosis of our condition. Because if our understandings of our conditions are flawed, then all liberating remedies and strategies that stem from that flawed diagnosis will also be flawed. According to the U.S. Journal of Mental Health and Psychiatry, the Stockholm Syndrome is a natural occurrence that sometimes happens when a hostage develops a psychological alliance with his or her captors during captivities. This was the case in the U.S. with the house Negroes during slavery. It was a natural occurrence that sometimes happened as a result of these slaves spending considerable time in the house with the enslavers. However, that's not our collective condition today. Our condition is not a natural occurrence. It's a deliberate one It was deliberately created and is being reinforced and reimplied unrelentingly upon our minds. The true reason why so many of our people now revere our oppressors is because most of our people aren't perceiving our oppressors based upon an accurate interpretation of the history shared between our racial group. Most of us are instead perceiving them through a favorable image makeover that they've deliberately embedded into our collective subconscious minds through movies, constantly depicting them as being the heroes, the saviors, and defenders of the meek. Most people think that movies are made for nothing more than entertainment. That was never the case. The greatest social messages are promoted through movies. Social norms promoted through media can influence the thinking of targeted population. In a normal conversation, when you're using logic and facts, your guard is naturally up. But when you're watching a movie, there's no debate. Your guard is down. The sensor part of your brain is not in action. It isn't saying, yes, I agree with this, or no, I disagree with that, as you would in a conversation or debate. When you're watching a movie, you're actually in an alpha state, being completely downloaded with ideas, information, and images. It was this media subliminal programming system that was used to manipulate millions of Black people to revere our oppressors in spite of such a brutally horrific history to the contrary. We have been programmed to do so. It's especially being done through our televisions. You know, when you repeatedly watch those TV shows that does those reenactments about Blacks who kill Blacks, and then there are usually the white detective who goes out and solves the crime, bringing a sense of justice and a sense of peace to the grieving Black families. Through repetition, when you're constantly watching those programs, your mind has been subliminally brainwashed to perceive ourselves as being our worst enemies and to revere and respect Caucasians. Look at the facts. It's easy to see. African Americans makes up 13.5% of the total U.S. population. FBI data confirms that most violent crimes, including homicide, are committed annually by Caucasians. However, those TV shows showcase Black on Black crimes at a 68% rate. This disproportion is by deliberate design. It's being done to subliminally embed the message into our subconscious minds that it's ourselves that are now our worst enemies, and we should respect and revere Caucasians. It's how the white society now keeps Black collective aggression shifted away from their white society and redirected towards ourselves. It's also the true reason why so many Black people now insist that it's ourselves that are now our own worst enemies. The minds of large targeted populations are easily manipulated when people don't know what's being done to them. White social scientists and white propagandists have deployed an ideological subversion system against the minds of Black people. Ideological subversion is an offensive psychological warfare tactic that uses disinformation and misinformation as a weapon to manipulate targeted populations. It changes what people believe or changes their perception of reality in ways that are against their own self-interest. The true reason why so many black people now revere as Caucasian and perceive ourselves as being our own worst enemy is because of this ideological subversion system that's been deployed against us. It's not a silly slave syndrome, nor is it the Stockholm syndrome. We must understand our favorable view of whites that clearly benefits the white society is by deliberate design. It was subliminally embedded into our collective minds through an ideological subversion system. Ideological subversion system is used to brainwash an entire generation to think as their oppressors wants them to think. What they've done to us is called socialized. Socialized is when the oppressors exploits their monopoly over information that are systematically and repetitively fed into the collective minds of the oppressed to manipulate the oppressed to think and behave in ways that serves and protects the interests of the oppressors. White social scientists describe this nefarious practice as merely instilling a value system into the collective minds of the subordinate population that makes them adhere to the authority and the existing infrastructure of the dominant culture. Whenever the oppressed starts thinking exactly as the oppressors wants them to think, it's always because they have been socialized to do so. The socializing of people is possible because people are like computers. All you have to do is keep giving people certain information every so often, and you can steer and persuade an entire generation towards an implied objective. It doesn't matter if the information presented is untrue. Most people will act accordingly to the information because they've all received the same disinformation. This is our hidden reality. There are 4 ways to effectively socialize an entire generation of people: by what they are taught, by what they see, by what they hear, and through constant repetition. Because the white society controls the education we're taught, the media images we see, and the societal narratives that we repetitively hear, these combined factors allows white oppressive forces to socialize, to covertly socialize the collective minds of black people to think in ways that benefit their white society without most black people even realizing it. It's how the white society secretly maintains its social dominance over black people and how it protects itself from massive unified black retribution. Welcome to the real world. Although all white governments now publicly professes equality for all, in reality, they are all secretly unrelentingly committed towards the preservation of their nation's white social dominance over its black population. There's also an immense concern of massive unified black retribution that secretly exists amongst those white nations that have brutally exploited Africans and Africa's natural resources for more than 4 centuries. This unrelenting commitment toward the preservation of white social dominance over black people and this immense concern of massive unified black retribution resulted in the white society socializing black people. The white society's exploitation of Africans has provided with an era of which it has flourished most throughout history. To allow this era to possibly end would be directly against the interests of the white society. The socializing of black people allows the white society to continue its subjugation and exploitation of black people without any significant black resistance. The African slave of the 21st century are those who are unable to free themselves from their socialized minds. The socializing of black people first began during our early education development, when our minds are young and most impressionable. White governed schools do not provide a racially affirming curriculum to black students as they routinely does so for white students. They instead intentionally give black students a marginalized version of our history. It is a classroom setting in which the majority of the achievements and contributions made by black people throughout history are being deliberately withheld from our students during their entire educational development. Black students are taught from a curriculum that primarily exalts the history and achievements of whites only, while marginalizes their own. For many Black people, our schools are in fact the places where we first experience the implication that there's something lesser about being Black. This is being intentionally done to us because the psychology conditions Black students to grow up perceiving ourselves through a false inherent inferior identity that aids the white society in maintaining its social dominance over Black people. That's what's being done in our schools right now. The white educational system's failure to adequately provide Black students with a racially affirming curriculum, as it so routinely does so for white students, is actually essential for maintaining white social dominance over Black people. Because for a ruling class to maintain its position of social dominance over its subordinate population, they must condition the subordinate population from a very early age to accept their own subordinate status and to adhere to the authority of the dominant culture. To do so, the education given to the oppressed, from the time that their minds are young and most impressionable, must be the type that denies them of a racially affirming education. When the oppressed population are denied of an affirming education, this psychology conditions them to accept a subordinate status within a society dominated by their oppressors. When the oppressed are denied an affirming education, even the brightest among them may have little of any hope of mentally extracting themselves from their feelings of inferiority. This immoral practice is precisely what's being done to Black people. This is the true reason why Black people are learning more Black racially affirming facts from each other on social media than we do so within our white governed schools. Schools are tools of the government designed to mold a student's character accordingly. The socializing of Black people is also being reinforced unrelentingly through constant fraudulent media propaganda that keeps Black people believing the fraudulent worst narratives about ourselves. The white media's unrelenting negative depiction of Black people that amplifies the negative to the point that it distorts our reality is so much more than just biased media reporting. It is actually an insidious Black racially demoralizing divide and rule psychological warfare campaign. Demoralized divide and rule is a method of maintaining control over a target population through constant and unrelenting demoralization. Its weapon is the demoralizing message that it carries and the way that it adversely affects the targeted population in terms of their behaviors. It is a process where the objective is to erode the morale of a targeted population through continuous demoralization in order to create self-hate and division between them. It can also destroy the morale of the targeted population to such an extent it can destroy their will to even fight or to even defend themselves against their oppressors. It's very effective. No group can be constantly inundated with negative demoralizing information about themselves and not suffer some adverse effect. It's not possible. This is the warfare tactic that's presently being deployed against Black people by white oppressive forces. It's deployed like a massive media marketing campaign that constantly subjects Black people to receiving only the fraudulent and worst narratives about ourselves. And as I've said before, no group can be constantly inundated with negative, demoralizing disinformation about themselves and not suffer some adverse effects. It's being done it demoralizes us, divides us, it creates Black self-loathing, and it shifts Black collective aggressions away from the white society and redirects it towards ourselves, thus benefiting the white society. It also attacks the core foundation of what bonds us as a people, and we can then be ruled over forever. It works by tapping into the immense power that shame has upon the human mind to mentally enslave millions of black people. Those black people who do not critically think never notices their mental change. And Jesus is not coming to save us. Jesus isn't coming to save us because Jesus is a work of fiction created by the Roman Emperor Constantine and the Council of Bishops in the year 325 AD. When they created the Jesus Messiah myth, it was an ingenious scam that gave the Roman Church greater power, because it literally meant that the church, that Jesus was the key to getting into heaven. This means the church held the only key to heaven, which is ultimate power on earth. Nothing's also being done to protect us or to free us from the socializing process, because we no longer have true black leaders. We only have black puppets who secretly actually works for the white establishment. And what's happening to us? Most black people don't know it. And most black people don't even know they don't know. This is the truth of our plight and condition. We must function based on what is true. The white society have created an elaborate prison for our minds. I'm trying to show you the door, but you have to walk through it. To emancipate your mind from white mental slavery, you must stop believing the white man's lies. You believing his lies will give him his power over you. Wake up. One love and peace.